Hey guys, so this week I want to focus on clauses. And one of the things we were struggling with a little bit, some of us, before we took this long break, was distinguishing between compound sentences and complex sentences. I think most of you were fine with understanding that you didn't just have a simple sentence you were looking at, but sometimes trying to determine which kind of sentence you were seeing and identifying posed some challenges for some folks. So I want to just review that with you a little bit, and then we'll do some practice. Okay. So to start with, compound sentences. These are sentences that have two independent clauses that are connected with coordinating conjunctions, and that's very limiting. There are just the fan voice. That's it. If two ideas are connected with one of the coordinating conjunctions, you know it's going to be a compound sentence at the very least. It could be compound complex, which we'll talk about later. But if there are only two complete ideas and they're combined with fanboys, then that's what you're talking about. So if you take a look at the example at the bottom, each one of those clauses could be independent. They could stand on their own. For example, he was tired. You have a subject, he. You have was, which is your verb, and then what was he? He was tired, that's your subject complement. It could stand by itself. But if we only wrote in simple sentences, our writing would be very choppy and boring to read. So we switch it up a little bit sometimes, and we have varied types of sentences, varied lengths of sentences. So when you combine he was tired with the second topic, all right, sorry, I don't know what happened that wasn't advancing. So here are just some examples of how you can use all of the conjunctions in the middle of two independent clauses. All right, they could stand on their own, but they don't need to stand on their own. Now, when we're identifying in our 4-level analysis of sentences, remember on the top we talk about these are the parts of speech. Underneath that, we identify the parts of a sentence like the subjects and the predicates and the direct objects, indirect objects, and so on. Underneath that, we identify all the phrases. And in the bottom, we identify what kinds of sentences we're looking at. And these are the two ways that you can identify a compound sentence, and the two ways that they can be written. First of all is the I, CCI, which stands for an independent clause, a comma, a coordinating conjunction, and then another independent clause. However, compound sentences don't necessarily need that coordinating conjunction. A coordinating conjunction with that comma can be replaced with a semicolon. It's still a compound sentence. Another thing I want you to understand that in a lot of writing, sometimes they leave out that comma before the coordinating conjunction. And as long as the second the second clause has a subject and a predicate, it's still a compound sentence even though they've left out that comma. So if it's just ICCI without the comma, just look real carefully at it and make sure it's combining two complete thoughts in order for it to be considered compound. Okay, so if you can memorize fanboys and you can look at that, find that conjunction, and decide if it's connecting two complete ideas, you know you've found a compound sentence. All right, as far as complex sentences go, these are sentences that have one independent clause and one dependent clause. And what makes that other clause dependent is it has a subordinating conjunction or some other kind of pronoun that's connecting it. So take a look at these examples. This is the house. That could stand on its own. The word that, connecting word, if you took that out, Jack built. It's not a great sentence, but it's complete. It has a noun and it has a verb. So it could stand on its own. It wouldn't sound great, but it's technically correct. So that is a complex sentence. That Jack built could not stand on its own. So it's dependent on the very first part of that sentence, the independent clause. I smiled after I won the race. I smiled, not a great sentence, a complete sentence though. And I think that's where we were struggling when we were practicing before this long break. When the independent clause was really short, and just a couple of words, and when it had a pronoun as its subject, I think you guys were struggling with identifying those. I think you were having a hard time seeing that as a complete idea. So I need you to find those connecting words first. When you're looking at a sentence, find those conjunctions or find those connecting words, which we'll look at a list in a minute that'll help you with the complex sentences. Find that first, and then look on either side of it, kind of like a seesaw, and try to decide, okay, is what's before this, is that an independent, complete idea? Is what comes after it a complete idea? And then you'll know what kind of sentence you're looking at. Here are lots of different conjunctions that could connect to clauses and make it a complex sentence. So this slide can be really helpful to you because these are some of those target words that you might be looking for. Notice that some of them are actually phrases. I don't like that so very much, but it's accurate. It could connect to complete ideas. Please remember, just like with fan voice though, just because you see some of these words does not mean that they're automatically connecting to complete ideas. They can be used in lots of other ways as well. So you really have to analyze what comes before it and what comes after it to see if it's really connecting to clauses, okay? This goes to that rule that in elementary school we were told never ever start a sentence with because of the rules that go along with complex sentences. We actually can now, as long as we follow the rules. And these are the rules. So if you are looking at a dependent clause, like because there was a pandemic, comma, I had to teach from home, period, right? So because starts that sentence. As long as I have that comma in the middle, separating the dependent clause because there was a pandemic from the independent clause, I had to teach from home, I have a complex sentence. If I took the word because out of there was a pandemic, that's a complete idea. That could stand on its own. But once I've tacked on the word because, it's kind of having that little 2-year-old brother or sister that you have to tag along to the mall with you. They're not going to stand on their own. They just made you very dependent because you have this little thing attached to you. Okay? So dependent clause, if it starts out the sentence, if that coordinating word, or I'm sorry, that subordinate word comes first, you have to have that comma separating the two ideas. Okay? Otherwise, you can have independent clause, dependent clause, where the because is in the middle. I had to teach from home because there was a pandemic. I don't need a comma then. Okay, it can just be one long sentence with no punctuation. So sometimes I think the punctuation was your clue when you were trying to identify the kinds of sentences. You looked for that punctuation and that was your tell. Oh, I'm looking at two different ideas here. But remember, you can still have an independent clause and a dependent clause without any punctuation separating the two if the subordinate comes second in the second half. Okay, so just some tricks to help you identify what kinds of sentences that you're looking at. Okay, so again, just to review the differences between these two, a compound sentence has two complete thoughts or two independent ideas. There's a comma and some sort of a conjunction, or we know that there can be a semicolon without the conjunction. Complex sentences, because of that subordinate word, remember sub means under, so that subordinate connecting word makes that one of those clauses dependent on the other. And then it has those connecting words. Okay, so these are the differences. You're going to go on to that website, that QUIA or AI. I sent you an email last week with your login and your password. And I want you to practice identifying the difference between a simple sentence, a compound sentence, and a complex sentence. And then we're going to be taking a quiz next week. Okay, but I'm going to be able to look in and see how you did on that website. I'll be able to see your results so I know who I might need to reach out and kind of give a little extra help to. All right, folks, thanks much.